Yeah.
It's every parent's worst nightmare, isn't it? Kids vanishing just like that.
Yeah, gone without a trace.
And for over 3 decades now, this case, the disappearance of Charles and Jennifer Chaw, it's haunted Reno, Nevada.
It has, yeah. And I think what makes this case so perplexing is that it happened, you know, in broad daylight, just steps from their apartment complex, right after they got off the school bus.
Yeah. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes, even in those seemingly safe environments, the unthinkable, it can happen.
It can.
So today we're going to take you back to October 18th, 1989.
Okay.
So Wednesday school is just let out at Anderson Elementary.
Hmm.
And there's this palpable sense of unease in the air. You know,
Yeah.
the day before, a massive earthquake had rattled nearby California.
Right, yeah.
And to add to this unsettling atmosphere, Charles and Jennifer, they were 8 and 6.
Okay.
They had a substitute bus driver that day.
And their mother was away on a trip to Taiwan, which is important, right?
Yeah.
Leaving their grandmother, who only spoke Mandarin, to care for them. So it's almost like a series of unusual circumstances converged to create like the perfect storm for this tragedy to unfold.
It really does feel that way, doesn't it?
It does.
So the bus drops them off around 3 p.m. at their usual stop,
Right.
which is, as you said, just a stone's throw from their apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think they'd be home in minutes, safe and sound.
You would, but that's where the confusion sets in.
Okay.
Initially, some children on the bus, they claimed to have seen Charles and Jennifer get off at their stop and even enter their complex.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But detectives later questioned the accuracy of those accounts,
Right.
considering, how young the witnesses were.
And to make matters worse, the substitute bus driver couldn't definitively confirm whether the Chaw children were even on the bus that day.
Right.
Can you imagine the frustration for investigators?
I can't.
Right from the start, they're
Yeah.
dealing with conflicting information
Yeah.
and this lack of reliable eyewitness accounts.
Absolutely. And it really hampered their initial efforts.
Right.
The children's boyfriend, who was checking on them while their mother was away, he started looking for them around 5 p.m. when he realized they weren't home.
Okay.
By 8 p.m., with no sign of them, he contacted the Reno police.
So at this point, no one was suspecting foul play, right?
And not necessarily. No, the police, while concerned, they initially operated under the assumption that the children might have just wandered off or gotten lost.
Yeah.
After all, they were known to be well-behaved and familiar with their neighborhood.
So they launched a search, right?
They did.
The classic door-to-door questioning search dogs retracing their usual route home.
Exactly. But despite their best efforts, they came up empty. The dogs couldn't pick up the children's scents, and no one seemed to have witnessed anything unusual. It was like they had vanished without a trace.
And this is where the case takes a truly sinister turn 4 days after the children disappear. The family's restaurant.
Oh, wow.
The Imperial Palace receives a chilling phone call,
A ransom demand.
a ransom demand.
A man's voice demanding $100,000 for the safe return of Charles and Jennifer. He provided few details, only promising to call back later.
Wow.
It's a classic ransom scenario, but the timing, coming days after their disappearance, it added a new layer of urgency and fear to the investigation.
And I can only imagine the agonizing wait for that second call, and the children's mother had just returned from Taiwan,
Of course.
and she must have been frantic.
Absolutely. While investigators tried to track down a man seen lurking near the bus stop wearing John Lennon-style glasses.
Really?
Yeah, the ransom caller, he struck again 2 days later, once again demanding $100,000 from the restaurant.
But this time the police were ready.
Yes, they traced the call to the apartment of a 30-year-old man named James Grooms, someone already known to them for drug and fraud offenses.
So they raided his apartment, hoping to find Charles and Jennifer. But
They found nothing. No Charles, no Jennifer, just James.
And what did he have to say for himself?
He claimed he was just an opportunist trying to capitalize on the family's desperation.
So while Grooms admitted to making the calls, there was no evidence directly linking him to the children's disappearance.
Right.
It's a frustrating development, isn't it? This individual clearly trying to profit from this horrible situation, but you're no closer to finding the children.
Exactly. It's like solving a puzzle, but realizing you have all the wrong pieces.
Yeah.
Grooms pleaded guilty to extortion and served 9 years in prison, but the mystery of what happened to Charles and Jennifer remained unsolved.
And tragically, that mystery took an even darker turn 9 months later.
Right.
All this time, the community held on to hope, praying for the children's safe return.
Of course.
Then in July 1990 came that devastating discovery in Plumas County, California.
Yeah, a group of transportation workers on their lunch break stumbled upon a shallow grave near Highway 70.
Oh, wow.
Inside, they found the remains of 2 children.
It's heartbreaking. A discovery like that, it just shatters any lingering hope. The location, Plumas County, it's about an hour away from Reno.
Right?
Did this new location offer any clues?
Well, it did, but it also raised more questions for investigators. The location suggested that the perpetrator might have some connection to the area.
Okay.
Perhaps it was a place they knew well or felt comfortable hiding.
And did they ever release any details about the cause of death or the condition of the remains?
No. Over 3 decades later, those crucial details remain sealed.
Really?
And there's a strategic reason for that. By withholding specific information about the crime scene, investigators protect the integrity of the investigation
Right.
and avoid false confessions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't want someone seeking notoriety or attention to insert themselves into the narrative by claiming knowledge they couldn't possibly have.
Precisely so. While the discovery of the remains provided a tragic answer to the question of what happened to Charles and Jennifer, it also added new layers to the puzzle.
Okay, so the investigation shifts.
Right. It does.
Now, it's not just about who took them, but why Plumas County, and what happened in those 9 months between their disappearance and the discovery of their remains.
Exactly. And remember that attempted abduction we mentioned earlier, the one in Portola just days before Charles and Jennifer vanished.
Right. The man with the long blonde hair driving the white truck, that seemed like a promising lead at the time.
It did. The similarities were striking, especially given the children's proximity to a school bus in both instances. But as the investigation unfolded, a few key differences emerged.
Like what?
Well, the descriptions of the suspect, while similar in some respects, differed in others.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the man seen near Charles and Jennifer's bus stop, he was described as wearing John Lennon-style glasses,
Okay.
a detail not mentioned in the Portola case.
So while the Portola lead ultimately didn't pan out, it did bring the potential for a serial abductor operating in the area to the forefront. But let's go back to James Grooms, the ransom caller.
Okay.
What happened with him?
Despite his conviction for extortion, investigators never fully closed the book on Grooms.
Right.
In 1995, 5 years after the children disappeared, they officially named him as a suspect in their murders.
What led them to that conclusion?
Several factors. Remember that menu from the Imperial Palace found in his apartment?
Huh.
That suggested he might have had some prior knowledge of the family.
Right, and you mentioned there were rumors circulating about Grooms having a history of molesting children, although those were never officially substantiated.
Correct. And while the rumors remain just that they certainly contributed to the suspicion surrounding him, but perhaps the most damning piece of evidence was the reports of Grooms boasting about the murders to fellow inmates while he was in prison.
Okay, now that sounds incriminating, but was it enough to charge him?
Unfortunately, no. The evidence against him, while suggestive, was largely circumstantial.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with legal terminology, could you explain what circumstantial evidence means in this context?
Of course, circumstantial evidence is evidence that relies on an inference to connect it to a conclusion of fact, like a fingerprint at the scene of a crime. By contrast, direct evidence supports the truth of an assertion directly, i.e., without need for any additional evidence or inference in Groom's case. The menu and the prison rumors, while suspicious, didn't directly link him to the crime scene or definitively prove he committed the murders.
Gotcha.
He maintained his innocence, admitting only to the extortion.
So while Grooms remained a prime suspect for many, the investigation continued to explore other leads. Tell us about some of those.
Well, in 1998, just after Grooms was released from prison, investigators looked into a Reno chiropractor who had been arrested for kidnapping and assaulting 2 Asian American boys in California.
Really?
The similarities were striking: the victims' ethnicity, their ages, but once again, no direct connection could be established.
And then there was the J.C. Dugard case, right?
Mm-hmm.
That captivated the nation. She was kidnapped in 1991, not far from where Charles and Jennifer disappeared, when her captor Philip Greedo was apprehended in 2009. It's only natural that investigators would explore any possible connection to the Chaw case.
Absolutely, it was a logical step. But after a thorough investigation, which included record checks and examination of physical evidence, they ruled out Greedo's involvement.
So it seems like every promising lead turned into a dead end. Years turned into decades, and hope began to fade. But then a glimmer of hope emerged from a surprising source: the original evidence.
That's right. Retired Detective Alan Fox, who had been haunted by this case for years, began to re-examine the evidence in light of advancements in DNA technology.
I remember back in 2002, investigators stated they didn't have any usable suspect DNA. So what changed? What made Detective Fox think there might be something in that old evidence that new technology could unlock?
Well, in the early 2000s, DNA testing was still relatively new, and the techniques weren't as sensitive or advanced as they are today.
Right.
What was once considered a dead end in terms of forensic evidence could now, with the power of new technology, hold the key to identifying the perpetrator.
So he essentially pulled a CSI, right?
Yeah.
Using the power of modern science to revisit old evidence.
You could say that it's a testament to his dedication and to the incredible advancements in forensic science that decades-old evidence could potentially crack open a case that has baffled investigators for so long.
It's almost like something out of a movie, isn't it? The thought that the perpetrator might have unwittingly left behind a trace of themselves all those years ago, just waiting for science to catch up.
Mm.
But what exactly are they looking at? What kind of evidence?
The specifics of the evidence are being kept confidential to protect the integrity of the investigation, but we do know that it's something that was found at the original gravesite.
Wow. Imagine that something collected over 30 years ago could hold the answers they've been searching for.
It's incredible.
So while we wait for the results of this new DNA testing, the question remains, who took Charles and Jennifer? Are investigators still considering James Grooms the ransom caller?
While they haven't definitively ruled him out, it seems their focus has shifted somewhat interestingly. Grooms has since passed away, though the details surrounding his death are unclear.
So even if his DNA were to match the evidence, it wouldn't lead to a trial, but it could offer a form of closure, right?
It could.
Knowing for certain whether or not he was involved.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how Detective Fox and Sergeant Conklin, who are currently leading the investigation, have a slightly different perspective on Grooms.
Okay.
They believe it's more likely the children were abducted by someone they knew.
Why is that?
They point out that Charles and Jennifer were described as cautious and unlikely to go with a stranger, especially without a struggle.
Okay.
And given the close proximity to their apartment complex and the lack of any eyewitness accounts of a struggle, it suggests a level of familiarity or trust between the children and their abductor.
So they're not ruling out Grooms entirely, but they're leaning towards the possibility that it was someone the children knew.
Yes, they believe Grooms, while opportunistic and capable of exploiting a tragic situation for financial gain, wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind.
Right.
Remember, he was easily caught for the extortion. They believed that if he had been involved in the murders, he would have likely bragged about it more openly or left behind more obvious clues.
So if not Grooms, then who? Are there any other persons of interest?
Not specifically, but their working theory that the children knew their abductor opens up a whole new line of inquiry. It suggests that someone familiar to the children, someone they might have trusted, could be responsible. It's a chilling thought, but it seems to be the direction the investigation is heading.
Yeah, it really is incredible to think about that. Something as small as a DNA sample could hold the key to unraveling a mystery that has gone on for over 3 decades now. It speaks volumes about just how far forensic science has come.
It really does. And it's not just about, identifying a potential suspect. DNA analysis can also help investigators reconstruct timelines, corroborate or refute witness statements, even shed light on the perpetrator's motive and methods.
Yeah, it's like piecing together a mosaic, isn't it? Each piece of evidence, each test result, it contributes to a larger, more complete picture of what happened. It does. But while we wait for these new DNA results, let's delve a bit deeper into some of the investigative theories surrounding this case. You mentioned earlier that Detective Fox and Sergeant Conklin believed the children might have known their abductor.
Right.
What leads them to believe that?
Well, they point to a few key factors. First, the location of the abduction. Remember, Charles and Jennifer were last seen just steps away from their apartment complex.
Right.
It's a familiar, seemingly safe environment.
And you'd think they would have put up more of a fight or attracted attention if it had been a stranger trying to force them into a vehicle.
Exactly. And there's also the fact that their grandmother, who was caring for them at the time, she didn't report hearing any commotion or signs of a struggle.
So the absence of any eyewitness accounts of a struggle, combined with that familiar location, it really suggests the possibility that the children might have gone willingly with someone they knew.
Yeah.
It's a chilling thought,
Yeah.
but it makes sense from an investigative standpoint.
It does, and Detective Fox has even spoken about this, publicly expressing his belief that the children were likely lured into a vehicle by someone they trusted.
Oh, wow.
He stated that they were good kids, cautious and unlikely to stray from their routine, especially with a stranger.
So if we entertain this theory that the abductor was someone familiar to the children, who might that be? Are there any individuals from their lives who have emerged as potential suspects?
Not specifically, and that's what makes this theory both intriguing and frustrating.
Right.
It opens up this whole new line of inquiry, but it also requires investigators to, re-examine the children's social circles, their family connections, anyone who might have had access to them and the opportunity to gain their trust.
It's like going back to square one, isn't it? After decades of focusing on individuals like James Grooms, now investigators have to consider the possibility that the perpetrator might have been hiding in plain sight all along.
Right.
Someone the children knew, someone the community trusted.
It's a disturbing thought, but it's one that investigators can't ignore. And, it's worth noting that this theory aligns with statistical data on child abductions.
Really? How so?
Well, studies have shown that in the vast majority of child abduction cases, the perpetrator is someone known to the victim.
Oh, wow.
It could be a family member, a friend, a neighbor, someone in a position of authority or trust.
So while the idea of a stranger abduction is certainly terrifying, statistically speaking, it's far more likely that the abductor is someone already within the child's circle of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And this case, with its unique circumstances and lack of clear evidence pointing to a stranger, seems to reinforce that statistical trend.
It does, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge this reality, not to downplay the fear and concern surrounding stranger abductions,
Right.
but to encourage parents, educators, and communities to be vigilant about potential threats that might exist closer to home.
Yeah, it's about being aware of the people in our children's lives, fostering open communication, and trusting our instincts when something feels off.
Exactly. And it's about advocating for child safety measures, background checks for individuals working with children, and creating environments where children feel empowered to speak up if they feel uncomfortable or threatened.
Those are such important points.
Yeah.
This case, while tragic and still shrouded in so much mystery, it offers a valuable lesson in the importance of vigilance and awareness when it comes to protecting our children.
It does. It's a stark reminder that even in seemingly safe environments, danger can lurk closer than we think. And it underscores the need for a multifaceted approach to child safety, one that involves education awareness and proactive measures to minimize risk.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the case of Charles and Jennifer Chaw, we're left with this sense of hope that this new DNA technology might finally bring answers. But we're also left with a sobering reminder of the complexities of child abduction cases and the importance of vigilance in our own lives.
Yeah, we can only hope that this case, despite its enduring mystery, will serve as a catalyst for greater awareness and proactive measures to protect children in our communities.
For those of you listening, we encourage you to delve deeper into this case. We'll have links to articles, photos, and other resources in our show notes. And if you have any insights or theories of your own, please share them with us.
Yeah.
This case, with its twists and turns, its enduring mysteries, it's one that continues to captivate and intrigue us all. We can only hope that justice, however delayed, will eventually prevail.